Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our annual Wealth Masterclass. My name is Paula Barrow, and I'm the Head of Growth for GCI Wealth. Today, we have an exciting lineup of speakers who are going to take us through the intergenerational wealth gap and how we're going to fix it. With us today, we have our very own CEO, Alex Cook. Also joining us is best-selling author and keynote speaker, Graeme Codrington, Saray, Khumalo, the very first Black African woman to summit Mount Everest, and Yas Reddy, our Head of Group Benefits, Short-Term and Health. We have quite a tight schedule planned, so please hold any questions you have until the end of the masterclass. Without any further ado, over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Paula. I'd like to take each of you on a trip down memory lane to a time when kids made boxcars and raced them up and down the road, to a time where entertainment came on vinyl or we went to the bioscope, to a time where telephones actually had wires attached to them and where wireless devices were either your radio or your television. In this time, the news actually arrived by paper. Roll on a few years, a floppy disk was state-of-the-art material, and if you had a stiffy, it just meant you had bigger storage capacity. These times, memories were captured on film, and to spend money overseas, we actually had to go to the effort of getting traveler's checks. In this time, the norm was to have a job for life, and accompanying that job was a pension. Fast forward 40 odd years, and a new generation emerges, one where kids and adults now play the same games they played outside, but online. Houses have become a whole lot smaller, and complex living has become the norm. Access to information has forever changed with the advent of the internet, which now delivers WhatsApp, YouTube, tweets, news feeds. The list is just endless. Even the way we meet our potential life partners has changed, where we actually meet online, which might arguably be safer than meeting in a bar. Fintech companies worth billions and billions of dollars have popped up overnight, making it easier and easier for us to spend money. In this generation, the average job tenure has actually dropped to 4 years, where many people will have up to 3 different careers throughout their working life. This is a marked difference in the way of life from then to now. This year alone has 21-year-olds who know no other world than a world with the internet. The world's become smaller, with access to travel far, far greater, enabling people to see more places far easier. Sitting here as a Gen Xer, I would say that there's no other adult generation in history that has had more opportunity to use services at their disposal to make their lives better and to increase their wealth easier. However, seeing this tweet a few months ago made me rethink my views on my original assumption. I'll read it to you. It's by Dan Price. Millennials hold 4.8% of all wealth. There are now 40-year-old millennials. At the same age, Gen X had 9% of wealth and boomers 21%. The largest generation in history did what the system told them to do and became the most educated. Now they're the poorest in history. Digging a little deeper, we uncovered this fascinating graph of assets by generation since around 1990. Now, as you'd expect, the silent generation and older are busy handing over their wealth. Baby boomers are not only maintaining their wealth, they are still increasing it. My generation, Generation X, are increasing wealth at a good pace. Millennials, however, are increasing wealth at a very slow pace. So who is Dan Price? Dan Price is the CEO of a company called Gravity Payments, where in 2015, he decided to drop his CEO salary significantly, enabling everyone in the firm to earn a certain minimum amount. He was branded as socialist by business as a whole. However, 6 years later, the company Gravity Payments is doing incredibly well. He didn't just decide this on a whim either. He took a look at the stats and saw how generations were becoming poorer and poorer and decided to do something about it. And these are the stats that prompted him to do that, where he saw that in inflation-adjusted terms, education costs have spiked. The price of homes has increased significantly. But the net worth of millennials is lower than that of baby boomers. And fewer millennials own homes, and fewer millennials own stocks. So if millennials are running out of time to build wealth, and the trend is just getting worse, where does that leave Gen Z and Gen Alpha? Coupled to the fact that people are living longer, but not necessarily able to contribute to society for the extra time they're alive. What that means is it's going to place a greater burden on the younger population to provide for us oldies when we've decided we're not going to work anymore. Now, you may be thinking this is just US stats. Unfortunately, South Africa is no different. Information from SARS and various other studies we uncovered on income and asset distribution in various age groups over time illustrates a similar trend. So we are not in the clear. Looking at this data reminded me of this quote by the founding father of Dubai, Sheikh Rashid, who said, "My grandfather rode a camel, my father rode a camel, I drive a Mercedes, my son drives a Land Rover, his son will drive a Land Rover, but his son will ride a camel." What this continually reminds me of is that once you've built wealth, it's not going to be there forever. It takes discipline, it takes education, it takes conversation, it takes responsibility, it takes sticking to the plan. There are so many factors that result in generational wealth staying as healthy as possible in order for families to continue through the generations living a happy, healthy life with enough to ensure they're not stressing about their finances. And that's why we exist as GCI. We have a world-changing purpose, and that is to change the face of retirement, to help create a world where financial security becomes a norm for absolutely everyone. And our short-term goal is to know that we're on the right path to this, is to help 150,000 people be in or on their way to a safe financial future by 2025. By working with our clients on a daily basis, we're heading closer to this each day. To fulfill our purpose, what we need is a few building blocks to be in place. And the first and most important is that we need to help educate each generation within a family on the basics of financial planning, to put good money habits in place, such as budgeting, and eliminate bad money habits, such as accumulating debt or depreciating assets. Once those basics are in place, we need to help each generation understand their role in intergenerational wealth. As an example, Gen X and millennials, it's now your job to accumulate wealth, whereas Gen Z, it's your role to accumulate as much knowledge as you can. The second thing we need is a discretionary fund manager, like the one we use, which is Cinnabar. Discretionary fund managers reduce the risks and the headache of having to constantly monitor your portfolio between various fund managers. In a world where there are over 640,000 different investment opportunities, we use Cinnabar to rationalize and simplify all that complexity and find us and our clients the right fund managers through various economic cycles to use. We also need the right tools to help our clients visualize their financial plan. We are now using WealthBit. WealthBit is a complementary tool available to each and every one of our clients, and it's the same tool that our wealth managers use when doing financial planning. Using WealthBit, you can now test a multitude of scenarios without breaking anything. And if you'd like your wealth manager to see if it makes sense, simply send it to them for review. As we've seen from the previous slides, things aren't working. Somewhere things have broken. So as a blend of various generations, we need to learn how to work together. And to do that, I'm going to hand over to Graeme Codrington to share with us exactly how we need to think about each other to get to a better future for everyone. Over to you, Graeme.
Thank you, Alex. This topic of fixing the intergenerational wealth gap is really something that I'm passionate about. I've been dealing with the issue of generations for most of my career. About 20 years ago, it was actually the topic of the first book I wrote called Mind Over Money, where I looked at different generational attitudes to wealth. And I've written 2 other books on generational theory since then. Now, I'm not going to throw a whole lot of theory at you today, but rather help you to think about this issue of intergenerational wealth. And the issue of generational theory helps us to understand other people's behaviors, especially people who are older and younger than you. That's the point of generations, right? If we want to understand and even influence people's behavior, we need to understand that all behaviors come from attitudes. That's fairly obvious. But where do attitudes come from? This is the key to generational theory. Our attitudes flow from our values. Our values are those deep parts of us, those inner beliefs that we might not even be fully aware of. And the issue that generational theory looks at is to understand that these values, or at least the way these values are expressed, they change over time. So, for example, the older generations here, they were brought up in an era where children were seen and not heard. The way that you honored your parents, for example, was by just listening to what your parents told you, not talking back, not giving an opinion, seen and not heard. Now, those of you who've got children today, how's that working out for you now, right? Today's young kids are raised differently. It's not that the children are suddenly different. It's we've changed our minds as parents about how we want our children to engage. And our children have access to different technologies and different role models, and there's different popular culture that helps our children to say, I actually want to tell you what I believe. We ask them for their opinions as parents, and honoring your parent today might be telling them the truth, giving them your opinion, helping them sort themselves out. I'm the father of 3 daughters, a teenager and 2 young adults. And I've had a lot of being sorted out over the last few years, you can imagine. That's the point, right? Is that different generations, or people from different generations, express their values in different ways. We might have the same underlying values of trust and integrity and respect and those sorts of things that are typically listed as values, but they get expressed in different ways. Or to go back to what I was saying, the values, we have to understand what the values are, then how those influence attitudes, and finally, how the behaviors might look different. Let me give you a practical example. Let's say that a young person gets a job interview. It's their first big job and their first real job interview. So you say to this young person, maybe you're the parent giving them information, maybe you're a grandparent or friend, whatever, but you're giving this young person advice, and you might say to them, wear your best clothes. Okay? Make sure that you put your best clothes on, and this is kind of what you have in mind, right? That they go to the interview looking really, really smart. As that young person goes in the morning to pick their clothes, they might end up coming out and saying, hey, this is how I'm going to the interview. Because as they look in their cupboard, they might say, these are my best clothes. This t-shirt, these jeans cost more than your suits do, Dad. These shoes I'm wearing here, they might look casual, but they are my best shoes, and you don't even want to know what I had to pay for them. In other words, the way that we engage with the world around us is different. Older and younger people see the world in different ways. And of course, that then flows into the way that different generations deal with and think about wealth, and think about money and finance. What is money for? Might sound like a strange question, but I'm going to come back to that because I think different generations actually think about money in very different ways. They use money for different purposes. And I think if we don't understand how different generations approach value, we're not going to be able to develop intergenerational wealth because the next generation will see the money, see the wealth, use the wealth in very different ways. So that's why this issue of understanding generations is as important as any financial planning might be, because it doesn't matter how much planning one generation does if the next generation undoes all of that, right? So that's part of what we have to do to fix the generational wealth gap, is fix our thinking around different generations' approach to money and wealth and finances. Your values were largely in place by the time you were 15 years old. It's not on your 15th birthday, but kind of by the time you're a mid and late teenager, your values are pretty much in place. And your values come from a variety of sources. This list isn't even a complete list. These are just the big ones of the various forces that shape your value system. What we know is different personalities, different cultures, different socioeconomic classes. We understand the impact of religion on people. So most of this list is fairly obvious to us, and we take account of the different values that they create. But the one we often miss out is the one we've been talking about today, is this issue of the era in which you were born, therefore the age that you are now. This is such a huge factor. Let me take you on a quick history lesson. It might seem like a strange thing to do, to quickly go into history, but you'll see how it builds up a story. So let's go back to the older generation in the world right now. These are the people who are sort of in their 80s and 90s now. They were born, as you can see here, during the Great Depression and World War II. So born sort of 1920s and 30s, right? And into the 1940s. So their earliest experiences, those shaping moments where history and politics and economics and the school curriculum and education and popular culture all shaped them in a particular way. It was difficult, tough times, right? Massive global crises, global emergencies that kind of shut down society as they knew it, forced people to live different lives for an extended period of time. There's some familiarity in this, isn't there? I'll come back to that. Generations tend to cycle through history, but we'll get back to that in a second. Let's go back to this generation. Even if you're not from this generation, you'll know the silent generation. Silent generation because children should be seen and not heard. That's where that label comes from. They will tell you about their childhood. When I was young, we never had, and whatever it is you've just been talking about, they will tell you how rough and difficult their lives were back in the day. And they grew up realizing that you only get through life with hard work, with discipline, with dedication, with perseverance. The way they thought about their job was get a good job in a good company and stay there. Work your way up through the system. Don't move around. Be cautious, be careful, be considered. That was their approach to life, mainly because of where they came from. That was pretty good advice, actually. It's the advice they still give to their children and grandchildren, even though that advice might not be the best for today. But it was really good advice for them, and it worked. Our focus today is obviously on money and finances and investments and wealth. So if we think about how the silent generation engages with money, for them, they know how hard it is to make money, and they are very cautious in how they spend it. In fact, they'd prefer not to spend it at all if they could do it. They're very good at saving. Now, of course, I'm generalizing. You understand this. You might have the most flamboyant splash the cash grandmother on the planet. I doubt it, though. I really do doubt it, because I I think that most people from this generation have been really good at looking after their money. They're realizing now in their later years in life the value of how much effort they've put into saving that money. A lot of them, even though they might not have earned a lot year by year in their lives, have actually got a nice lump sum. But what do they want to do with that money? They don't want to spend it. They definitely don't want to spend it on themselves. I know so many people from this generation who really could do with buying a new car or maybe doing a bit of upgrading to their house. But you've got to beg them to spend the money they've got. What are they saving that money for? They're actually saving it for an inheritance to give to the kids and the grandkids, because that's how they see money, right? For them, the purpose of money is security, is making sure that we can live the life we want to live. Not that we can splash the cash and get luxuries, but that we can just secure the life that we've got and secure it for the next generation. They think about the next generation. You'll see the difference in a second to the next generation. But that's the silent generation. I'm sure you recognize your parents or grandparents, maybe yourself, as you look at this, obviously depending on your age. So let's quickly move on with our history lesson, because what happens next? Well, the Second World War is over. It's a new generation. The 1950s and 60s emerge. It's the drug, sex, rock and roll era. It's a wonderful time. We've got young political leaders coming in, bringing in, John F. Kennedy, bringing in this new vision of what we could be, and the sense of optimism, and the sense of dreaming. Martin Luther King Jr., I have a dream. And that view of, if you can think it, if you can dream it, you can do it. Oprah Winfrey's, yes, we can. That's this generation called the baby boomers. I'm sure you've heard of the label. These are people who are now in their 50s, 60s, into their early 70s. And it's a generation that's brought energy and hard work, probably workaholics, to be honest. This was the first generation for most families where father and mother both had an income. It was also the first generation in history where the young people did not do what their parents had done for a living. Throughout most of human history, children just did what their parents, especially their father, had done. And now, for the first time, baby boomers got to go and get an education, got to dream, got to do things differently. And they see the world in very different ways. They're idealistic, optimistic, yes, we can kind of people. And when it comes to money, they're not scared to get into debt. They're not scared to spend the money. My own mother-in-law called me aside. She's a baby boomer, and she called me aside a number of years ago and said, Graeme, I just want us to be very clear between ourselves. There's going to be no inheritance. I am skiing. I said, what do you mean skiing, Eunice? She said, I am spending my kids' inheritance. I'm going skiing, right? And she's not joking about that. The joke goes, that she wants her last check to be paid to the undertaker and she'd like it to bounce. And I think when the baby boomers think about money, and again, I understand I'm generalizing, this isn't true of every single baby boomer, but I think it's generally true of most of them. For them, money is about keeping score. Money is about knowing you're being successful. It's kind of like keeping up with the Joneses. You check out what other people are doing and you copy them. And there's good and bad things about that, of course. But for this generation, it's about knowing, am I successful? How am I doing? It's keeping score. And then it's about using your money to enjoy your success and to enjoy yourself. And of course, that means also spending. It's not all just selfish. They can give a lot to charity, they can enjoy sharing that money around. But largely, if they're saving for something. It's not the security of that older generation. It's about the use and the enjoyment of the money they've got. So that's the baby boomers. In summary, there's a lot more we could say. So now we get to the next generation, which, if you know anything about generational theory, it's called Generation X. X being the variable, the unknown, the changing factor in an equation. And Generation X, this is, if you know the literature, globally, Generation X is the generation between the boomers and the millennials. And millennials are normally defined as young people who started graduating high school in the year 2000, the change of millennium. That's where they get their name, the millennials. And so Generation X then is the generation sort of from the mid-60s, the end of the baby boomers, to 1984. So internationally, that's kind of where we look at. So they're kind of in their sort of mid-30s to late 40s now. In South Africa, I'm convinced, and I did my master's research on this, I'm convinced that apartheid delayed the end of the baby boomer era. We've still got those baby boomers. That's in power in South Africa. That baby boomer generation are now what fills our cabinet and the leadership of the ANC, because they were that older generation, they're now in their 60s and 70s, those baby boomers, who were fighting, who had the dream of freedom. And they haven't given it up. But that's not just South Africa, right? The baby boomers are in charge in America. Two oldest presidential candidates fighting it out against each other last year. In a lot of places around the world, the baby boomers are not handing over power. We've got some of the oldest people leading business and leading our countries that we've ever had, the baby boomers. And I think apartheid delayed our shift to Generation X. So for me, June 16, 1976 is probably the shift where we can see Generation X emerging in South Africa. Anyway, maybe that's a little bit too much detail, but for those of you who know the theory of this, you'll understand that there's slight differences in different parts of the world. In general, though, your Generation X's are those people today who are in their 30s and 40s. And they grew up during a time when the world was a mess all around the world. Here in South Africa, clearly the 1970s and 80s were political and economic and social chaos. But actually, to be honest, the same was happening all around the world. The oil embargo taking place in the 1970s, Margaret Thatcher smashing the unions, Ronald Reagan, the Cold War, all sorts of, all over the world. There was just chaos. And Generation X grew up pragmatic. Grew up thinking, well, whatever, what will be, we'll just deal with whatever happens as it happens. It's very difficult. You can't really make plans because the world changes so quickly. The adults don't look like they know what they're talking about. Who's in charge around here anyway? And what are they doing? I don't know. Let's just see what happens. Now, I think that flows into their attitude towards money. I think Generation X is a lot more pragmatic generation. Research shows that they're not a great generation of savers. They were the generation, if they got a nice big chunk of money, instead of saving it, they'd buy a decent sound system, or they'd buy experiences. Generation X is more keen to create experiences. So if they have wealth, they'll use that wealth to create experiences. They'd much rather travel than save, for example, because they think you need to experience the world around you, and they're a lot more pragmatic. They'll just let's see what happens next. Again, we know I'm generalizing, but I think I'm generally correct about this. So then we get to those millennials, sometimes called Generation Y, because Y comes after X. There are, in generational theory, there are reasons to talk about those two separately. I'm just going to treat them as the same thing now. And this is today's young people, right? Not the children, but the teenagers and 20-somethings who are sort of getting into work, finishing their education. And they see the world in very different ways, again, to any of the other generations that we've seen. There's a remarkable piece of research which I think helps to define why this is the case. That was done 10 years ago, kind of as the oldest of the millennials came into the workplace. And a New York Times reporter looked at the 5 key factors that help us know that somebody shifted from childhood to adulthood. You've completed your education, you've left your home, you've become financially independent. You've either married or made a decision about whether you want to marry or not, and you've had children or decided whether you want children or not. And back in 1960, so this is the older generations, by the age of 30, 2/3 to 3/4 of adults or of 30-year-olds had done all 5 of these things. I wonder if you can guess what the millennials are like as they head to their 30s, right? As they head to their 30th birthdays. What they are like? 10%. This is the massive difference. And to go further than that, at about age 30, a lot of them are having a quarter-life crisis. Because they think, is this all my life is? There's a wonderful concept, and this kind of gets to the heart of what I want to leave with you today. It's a wonderful Japanese concept called ikigai. Ikigai is about how to find life fulfillment. It's more complicated than that, but that's probably the best way to describe it. And there are 4 factors that we have to look at in terms of how we make decisions about our lives, especially our careers and so forth. Now, I think that the silent generation only worried about 2 of these. Can I do it, and will I get paid for it? So do I have the ability, and is there a salary available? I think the baby boomers and Generation X added the question, and more Generation X added the question of, do I actually like it? I don't want to get trapped in a career that I really don't like. Lawyers, doctors, engineers, accountants, actuary, vets, professionals, yes, they get paid well, but lives of quiet desperation. I don't want that. And so I think a lot of Generation X has said, I need to love what I do as well. And I think what the millennials, Generation Y, are adding now is to say, does it make a difference to the world? And I think that helps us understand how Generation Y, the millennials, look at money. Money is a resource. Wealth is a resource to be able to do something. Now, I think they'll get along with the boomers here because they want to invest, they want to multiply that money so that they can do something with it. But I think today's young people are less thinking about what can I do for myself, which is a lot of what the boomers want. And I think the millennials are saying, how can we use this wealth to change the world? Now, I'm not going to talk about the kids today, the next generation, but I wonder if the comments I made a little bit earlier help you, because generational theory suggests there's a cycle of 4 generations. And if I was right about the silent generation being born during a global catastrophe, a global crisis where we had to shut the world down and we realized it was hard work, maybe today's kids, the next generation, are going to have a similar experience. It's kind of their World War, their Great Depression. Anyway, I'll just leave that question hanging for you there. The point I want to make and want to leave you with is this, that we might have been living in the same house, inhabiting the same environment, going to the same churches and, watching the same TV shows as people older and younger than ourselves. But we've been living in different worlds. Actually, more accurately, we live in the same world, but we see and perceive and experience that world differently. And if we think then about how we engage with financial decisions, with intergenerational wealth issues. And we think about this issue of values. We might have similar values, but the way we express those values is different. And hopefully what you've got from my session is that you can see that there isn't a right and wrong. It's not as if one generation is right and the other generation is wrong. It's that when we look through the lens of multiple generations, we realize that there is value in us working together as an intergenerational group, whether that's a family or an organization, but we bring these different perspectives, different ways of looking at money, different ways of engaging with money. And if we combine them and get the best out of each of them, we'll get the security of the silent generation, we'll get the enjoyment of the baby boomers, we'll get the pragmatism of Generation X, and we'll get the generosity and engagement with purpose of the millennials. Wouldn't that be wonderful if we could do that? It doesn't solve the financial planning conversation, but hopefully this insight into different generational values, and maybe coming back to this concept of ikigai, if we can find a way to engage in our financial thinking in a way which says, are we able to do it? So what, are we good at it? Will it make us money? Do we enjoy it? And does it make a difference in the world? If we can find that ikigai sweet spot of doing all of those things, I think we'll both secure generational wealth and enjoy it together as different generations. That is certainly my wish to you, your family, your organization, your group, that we can fix the generational wealth gap. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Graeme. That was unbelievably insightful. If you want to walk fast, walk alone. But if you want to walk far, walk together. Ratan Tata's quote is so apt for Yos's launch of our exciting GCI initiative on the part we are going to play to fix the intergenerational wealth dilemma. Over to you, Yos.
Thank you, Paula. Now, I've never started a business presentation with high school photos of myself, but for today, it's with good reason. I was privileged to have a fantastic school education, one that laid the foundation for me to enjoy a very prosperous career. But what my school education lacked was the basic tenets of financial literacy that I needed from a life perspective. If my school education had taught me the power of savings, the impact of compound interest, and how putting a little bit away regularly made such a massive impact in the long run, I would have had a much better understanding of personal finances. Truth be told, I would have made much more informed and, quite frankly, much better financial decisions than I did in my early adulthood. Now, like me, have you ever asked the question, why didn't they teach us this at school? Now, when we think about managing finances, we generally think how to get rich quick, how to make the most amount of money in the least amount of time. And for the majority of us, those get rich quick tips and tricks don't really work. When I think about the culture of today and getting rich quick and all the schemes that are out there, I immediately think about my sons. The number of times I've heard about the latest rap star or social media influencer that's coining it in a short space of time, the first thing I want to do is berate them. But then I'm drawn to conversations I had with my father. And I was exactly the same when I was their age. And my father sat me down and he said, "Son, building wealth is a marathon. It's not a sprint." For the parents in the audience, I'm sure you can relate. And the truth is, like most things, a healthy financial future requires time, patience, and financial literacy. Now, earlier Alex spoke about our purpose, to change the face of retirement. And in pursuit of that purpose, we at GCI appreciate that we can't go and make wholesale changes to their education system. But what we can do in trying to impact as many lives as possible is provide quality financial literacy, content curated by financial experts and made freely available to all. We want to provide a platform where people can go and learn, people can grow, and people can be educated on the importance of financial freedom and taking control of their finances. And we want this word to be spread far and wide for more and more people to be empowered to improve their wealth, not just for themselves, but for generations to come. And if we can pay it forward, we can put an end to the vicious cycle that the world seems to be spiraling down. We want to teach you about personal finances, how to budget, the pros and cons of buying things on credit, the benefits of long-term investing, and the pitfalls of chasing short-term gains. Now, one of the most crucial skills we can ever learn in our lifetimes is the skill of how to manage money. We're going to help you to stop scraping the barrel, and we're going to give you the tools to take back control of your personal finances. And it's with that I have tremendous pleasure in announcing our most exciting project to date. We've developed a platform called GCI Educate, which is going to fix the gap in financial education. It's a platform where anyone can come to learn about money and take control of the personal finances at the earliest possible age for the benefit of them and for generations to come. A platform that's going to teach the things I referred to earlier when I posed the question, why didn't they teach us this at school? We want to educate our beautiful country and beyond. And with GCI Educate, we can start to do just that. It's a free online repository of a variety of financial content in the form of videos and blogs, focusing on educating people on financial success. It's even got tips and tricks that may help my sons to take control strategically of how to invest, how to spend, and how to manage their finances. And for them to even apply what they've learned for the benefit of future generations in our family, beyond just them. And for them to start focusing on the intergenerational wealth gap and how to fix it. Our goal is to ensure that all our clients, all their friends, and all their families, and even strangers to the GCI community, because remember I said, it's free for all. Anyone can come and learn about finances and be empowered to take control of their financial freedom, and GCI Educate will be the preferred platform of choice. Ultimately, everyone, irrespective of their age, of their skin color, or their socio-political background, deserves the same opportunity to learn about finances, to learn the good habits, to learn to get rid of the bad habits, and to become financially free. Now, we've put together a variety of content that we think is appropriate, but we don't know what we don't know. So that's where you come in. We'd like you to inform us what you think would be appropriate to help you to manage your personal finances. But wait, there's more. What happens when you have a good financial education? Well, you need a tool to be able to put a financial plan in practice. Don't stress, we've got you covered. Our market-leading fintech tool, WealthBit, allows you with just a couple of clicks to take your newly found financial education and put in place a practical financial plan. And best of all, it's absolutely free to you, the end user. Let's spend a couple of minutes and see how WealthBit closes the loop between financial education and sound financial practice.
Planning your financial future can be daunting, uncertain, and a little overwhelming, to say the least. Excel spreadsheets that don't make sense, piles of paper including policies you've long forgotten. Your financial plan is a beautifully confusing mess. Plus, isn't life always changing? Inflation, holidays, new arrivals. How can you possibly know today what your retired future will look like? Best to leave your planning and your future to someone else to manage for you, right? Wrong. Imagine a world where you could get a sneak peek into all your possible futures. A world where you had complete control of building plans and outcomes that suited your changing lifestyle. Your own financial crystal ball, if you will, that gives you a clear, succinct, consolidated view of your entire financial future through personal scenario planning. Some would call that true bliss. We call it WealthBit. Built to be the world's first retirement and wealth cash flow planning tool, WealthBit gives you your very own personal, engaging, logical, real-time scenario planning experience right at your fingertips. It's a living financial planner you've been missing your whole life. How does it work? Finally, you can now see the bigger picture, your financial bigger picture. What you have now, what you'll need when you retire, and the roadmap to make that happen. We're taking peace of mind to a whole new level. Plus, we can link you with a financial advisor of your choice, giving you the added benefit of a co-planning guide, so you'll never feel like you're making decisions without an expert right by your side. Take the pain out of planning and take control of your financial life. Your single view financial future is just a few clicks away. It's that simple. With WealthBit.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's up to us to make the difference. At GCI, we are driven by our purpose, about making a meaningful impact to the communities we serve. And we have an army of experts that are available to contribute a significant amount of value in the educational space in South Africa. And with the launch of GCI Educate, it's our solemn promise to our clients, to the country and beyond, that we'll do our bit, that ensuring when financial planning decisions are made, they're made by people who are educated, people that are prepared, and that good decisions can be informed decisions.
Yes, thank you for that. That was really great. Both WealthBit and GCI Educate are two incredible platforms that we are going to help us bridge the intergenerational wealth gap. Having the tools is only half the journey. Having the right mindset is the other. When we learn to become resilient, we learn how to embrace the beautifully broad spectrum of human experience. Saray Khumalo has some wonderful insights that talks to resilience, and she's about to share her journey with us. Welcome, Saray.
If your goals don't scare you, they ain't big enough, they say. I'm a testament of big goals. As a township girl, I woke up one day and decided that I want to step on top of the world. No one like me had ever done so. And it started in 2012 when I summited Kilimanjaro. And a young girl challenged me and said, people like us don't do things like this. And it made me realize that growing up, I too grew up thinking that I can never be a superhero. You can see all the Superman, She-Ra, they didn't look like us. They were flying around. Nobody around us flies. But I realized subsequently that you and I can be superheroes. You and I can change this world. We have the superpower to do so. And I found myself on Everest in 2014, optimistic about the summit, with romantic ideas about what climbing Everest is all about. Yes, I was aware that there are dead bodies. I was aware that there is death that comes with climbing sometimes, but it happens to them and not me necessarily. I was there with very experienced climbers, even though I was a novice climber, with great imposter syndrome because no one there had as little experience as I had. But something happened on the 16th of April, 2014. A big Sirac fell off the mountain and killed 16 Sherpas as they were making their way to Camp 1. And suddenly, the very experienced climbers looked as scared as I was. The very experienced climbers didn't have answers for me when I said, what should we do? And I realized that it was a personal journey. It was then that I realized that I'm not just an ordinary African woman. I am uniquely extraordinary. We are all uniquely extraordinary with a role to play on this earth during the time that we have. I also realized that the amazing Sherpas, the unsung heroes that were a lot more experienced, that died, it was their time, but it wasn't mine. What did I have to still do before my time came? The sense of agency clicked in. I came back home to people saying, shame, you tried. Yes, I tried, but I can try harder. I've got lessons that I've learned from 2014. I was able to amass more experience by climbing in the Himalayas before I came home. I picked up that people that are runners and cyclists were a lot more strong in climbing than I was. And I decided to adopt what they were doing in order to be a better climber. I also went back to why was I on the mountain? And what is it that I was meant to learn from this experience of 16 Sherpas dying, of myself finding myself in that environment. And I went back in 2015, a lot more resolute, a better climber, trained differently. I chose my own Sherpa because I knew I could. And unfortunately, in 2015, once again, there was a big earthquake in Nepal. It killed over 9,000 people and killed 22 people at Everest Base Camp. That earthquake happened while we were walking towards Camp 2. We could see it, and our aim was to get there by 2 o'clock. And suddenly, the glacier beneath us started shaking. And Nawang, who was my Sherpa, turned around and said, Sarah, he hooked his carabiner onto mine and said, we jump onto the same side. So the plan was, if the glacier opened up, we needed to jump onto the same side. If we jumped on opposite side, we were both going to fall in. Isn't the world shaking around us with COVID and the pandemic, making us question things that we knew to be, Bible verses, we knew to be rules to winning the game, and changing everything for us as we continue to say the new normal? What are the rules? What are you doing to make sure that you don't only survive after this, but you thrive? And that was a moment of reckoning. Nawang had 22 years experience. He looked at me and said, we are jumping. I trusted him, we were going to jump. And suddenly the earthquake stopped. We didn't know it was an earthquake at the time, mind you. And it felt like 5 minutes, but I believe it was less than 2 minutes. And as it stopped, he said to me, okay, we are all right. He started unhooking himself from me so that we can figure out what's going on. And the mountains around us started avalanching. And this is the year after the avalanche that killed 16 Sherpas. And suddenly, Nawang started praying, Om Mani Padme Hum. This is a Tibetan prayer that I know how to recite. I don't know what it means. I am a Christian. So I looked at him and realized that the man is scared. And the man is praying to a God that I only learned about 2 days before. That God is not going to save me. So I was like, Jesus, because I am a Christian. And that says leadership. When we are in trouble as we are, when we need to make tough decisions as leaders in our homes, as leaders in our communities, as leaders of our finances, how assertive are we, and how are we making sure that everybody is aligned to where we're going? Yes, we may make wrong decisions, but fall and fall forward. Learn quickly and get up and keep going. Curveballs will always come. That's a guarantee. It's not about the fact that we are going to fall. It's about how we're going to get up so that we don't only survive, but we thrive after this pandemic, after the earthquake, after the avalanches. And once again, the mountain was closed. And I found myself coming back home to explain that I didn't make it once again. To people saying, shame, you tried. Maybe it's not meant for us. And as most of you may know, Everest is not a cheap expedition. I continued sending letters trying to find funding, and I didn't find any. In 2016, I couldn't afford to go back to Everest. And unfortunately, I was involved in a near-fatal mountain bike accident that left me in a coma for almost 3 weeks. And I remember waking up there, not thinking about climbing, just thinking about surviving, really. And 3 months after getting out of that coma, I ran a marathon and finished, and ran to the doctor the next day and said, but I was able to run 42 kilometers. Surely I can still climb. That is failing forward in my mind. I found myself back on Everest 8 months later in April 2017. And this time I was able to go all the way up to the south summit, which is 99 meters from the top. It's not over until it's done. And 99 meters from the top, the winds were unbearable. We miscalculated the weather window. And my Sherpa and I decided to go back to Camp 4. Now, you climb Everest from base camp, Camp 1, Camp 2, 3, 4 to the summit. Between Camp 4 and the summit is what we call the death zone. Because when you sign in the fine print, you sign that if anything happens to you in the death zone, nobody's obliged to come and rescue you there. And in there, I found myself almost near death. I lost consciousness as I was coming down from the south summit, close to Camp 4, because my oxygen supply was malfunctioning. And Nawang was not doing well because the winds were quite terrible on that day. And he went back to Camp 4, got other shepherds. They came and picked me up and they put me in a tent. I spent almost 30 hours without food. And they put me in a makeshift tent because the winds had blown off all my belongings, my sleeping bag. And the next day they came with a stretcher to come and pick me up. I remember waking up and the shepherd says, "Oh, you are alive." And I'm thinking, of course I'm alive, but I'm hungry. And he said he didn't have any food, but he had water. For the first time, I stood up and I looked at Everest, so close and yet so far. I wondered if all those people that said, I didn't belong on the mountain, that, no one like me could make it, whether they were right and I was just stubborn. I think it was the lowest point in my journey. Sometimes curveballs hit us so hard. It's always important to remember that we are stronger than they are. It's a momentary moment. Stand up, get up, find your tribe, the right tribe, to help you move forward. Set that goal from there in terms of where you need to go, because the summit is still waiting for you. I came back home, and in 2018, I was sitting at home and my young son, he was 15 at the time, looked at me and said, "Mom, when are you going back to Everest?" Mind you, not "are you going back?" He says, "When are you going back?" Because in his mind, I wouldn't have given up. I must be planning something. And I looked at him and I said, 2020. And I continued training. And in 2019, I lost a good friend that is the first person that told me that no Black African woman had summited Everest, because until 2013, I did not know that. I did not know that. I thought we have done everything. By the way, we haven't. So what is it in your field that hasn't been done so that you can represent? Let's do that so that we can ensure that we inspire the next generation, so that the next generation doesn't attempt Everest 4 times before the summit. They attempt one time, they do it faster because you dared to dream. In the South African context, if you look at us, we are enjoying as women all these privileges because some women in 1956 stood up and walked up to the Union building. What is you and I in this generation doing to ensure that the next generation has it easy? They have a platform and they play on the same playing field as their counterparts around the world. And I found myself back on Everest with a different strategy. I wasn't anxious about the summit. I was able to celebrate small wins. I got to Camp 1 and I celebrated that. I wasn't looking at how other people were climbing faster than me. I didn't mind. I had my own game plan and I followed it. I had an amazing leader. I was part of the conversation. Why are we going for this weather window? How are we doing this? And I went up all the way to the top of the world. It was an emotional moment for me. I remember thinking about my mother, who always used to tell my sisters and I that the sky is the limit, and how wrong she was. The sky is not the limit. Just because that's what we can see does not mean that's what we can achieve. We can achieve and are capable of much, much more. Like Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. I also remember reflecting on how this township girl that was told that she couldn't persisted, looked at what she could change, and focused on that, and focused on our own strengths, surrounded herself with the right tribe to get me to the top of the world. I also remember that all those that had closed doors in my face were really closing windows as they left the gate wide open for me to step on top of the world. It was a historical moment. It was a moment that humbled me. I went up thinking I had no cheerleaders, but people were cheering me on as I cheered myself on to the top of the world. Intergenerational wealth is not an impossible phenomenon. If we are resilient, if we realize that we are stronger than anything that comes our way, we are capable of much more. We are capable of changing the narrative for the next generation because we are deliberate and we are intentional with every step that we make. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Together with Graeme, your messages were so powerful, and you both dropped nuggets all over the place that I think we should pick up and summarize. The first one that I found is that we need to start with the end in mind, both for ourselves and our family. A good but slightly morbid way of doing this is to start by writing your own eulogy. Even decide who's going to be reading your eulogy at your funeral, and then work backwards and create a plan to make that eulogy a reality. Secondly, do you have a set of core values in place for your family? Core values are best passed down as stories, and they help drive the attitudes and behaviors that Graeme mentioned. As a family unit, we have a core value which says that respect for money, where intergenerational wealth will allow future generations to live their impactful purpose. So that's one of ours. You might want to adopt your own. Thirdly, use a framework to have objective family conversations about wealth. This is a part of the education process. And as a family, we use WealthBit. And what that does is it just removes any emotion from financial discussions. The numbers are the numbers. GCI Educate has been designed for just this purpose. And finally, as a family, once you've created wealth, once you've created values, once you've educated your future generations, ask yourself the question, if you've put mechanisms in place to make sure that the wealth will effectively be handed down through the generations. It's been an absolute pleasure being with each one of you today. We're lucky enough to still have time with the speakers who are available for questions.
Wow, how amazing were all our speakers today. Before I move on to all the questions in the chat box, I would like to say thank you to all our fabulous speakers today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, your experience, and your expertise with all of us. I suppose the challenge for me now is which question do I start off with? Let's start off with Sarah. Sarah, what do you think is the best way to build a resilient mindset when it comes to trying to achieve our goals?
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I think for me, it's to accept that things change, but be very clear on what is important to you. I think I do that quite a lot. And some people say, what is your why? I think if you know what is important, what your why or your purpose is, it's very clear to understand how best to move forward, irrespective of the circumstances. The other thing that is important is to be flexible and adaptable, and understanding your own strengths and how you can use them to move forward. And lastly, have the right partners or tribe around you. I always talk about Everest, and I say there are Sherpas that will take you up to Everest Base Camp. If that's your destination, that's cool. But if it's not, say goodbye, change tactics, get the right people to get you to the top of the world. It's important to recognize that.
Sarah, thanks for sharing your pearls of wisdom with us. Graeme, let's move on to you. There was a question asked, isn't COVID taking our world to another depression now?
Look, COVID's not finished with us yet, right? So we're not sure exactly where it's going to go. I'm sure some of your experts will have maybe even a better view from a financial perspective on this. But I think, you know, the world is resilient. And the good thing about COVID is that it hasn't destroyed infrastructure. I mean, it's been horribly destructive to society. I think we all now know people in our close circles that have passed on because of it. So there's a massive human and emotional toll. But it's not like a war where there's, you know, buildings and cities are bombed out and infrastructure has been massively broken. So once we've dealt with the health crisis that's emerged, there's no rebuilding to do. So, you know, in South Africa, we can see the rebounding of the commodities, which impacts mining. And so that's doing fairly well. We've seen actually quite a lot of companies in quite a few industries having their best years ever. I'm watching the results as they released on the JSE, but telecoms has done well, retail has done well, but some of them, those that had e-commerce and delivery options. I've got a whole lot of vets as friends. I've suddenly realized they're all having their best years ever. We all got pets during lockdown. But obviously you wouldn't want to be in tourism or hospitality. So long answer, but it's a good question. No, I don't think we're heading for a depression. I think some industries have been badly, badly bruised. Hopefully they will be able to recover reasonably quickly. I think we're seeing a rebound across the world, and will continue to, if we're not hit with a massive new wave or new variants of COVID. Are we still in the system? I seem to have lost Saray. You and I are here. I can see you smiling.
Yes, I can see you. I enjoyed your presentation, by the way, Graeme.
I enjoyed yours as well. I'm not sure if we have lost the GCI team for some reason.
All right, but I can see a question for you.
There we go. Now, yeah, go for it. Take a question if you can see a question.
Somebody says, where can they get your book?
all good booksellers should have it, but maybe the best place to go is my website, graemecodrington.com, and you'll pick up all the information about my resources and online stuff and where to buy my books. graemecodrington.com. Thanks.
Fantastic. I see Alex is back. So
I see they're back. Yeah, the GCI team suddenly disappeared there.
Sorry, guys. There was one of those avoidable technical issues. We're back, and thank you very much for that. Sorry, Graeme, I did miss the 1 or 2 bits, but thank you for sharing, and thank you for taking care of all of us.
No, pleasure.
Thanks, Graeme, you're a star. And Sarah, let's move on to the next question, and let's pick on my boss. He pretty knows me very well. And Alex, as you know, I'm a very conservative type of investor, and especially with my money and my investments. Is there any way for me to build wealth while I can still mitigate as much risk as possible?
It's a good question, very good question for that. And it's one where I think we need to probably first just think about what is risk. What is risk? So if I said to you, well, invest into a money market, and next year you're going to have another 4%, you're pretty sure that you're going to get that 4%. And if you had to take that same thinking and you said, well, if I invest over 10 years, you're also pretty sure you're going to get that 4%. But what you're also sure of is you're probably going to, at very best, do what inflation does, but you're probably going to, after tax, do less than what inflation does. So if you plug that less than inflation number into a plan, what you're going to end up getting isn't a result that you want to get. So by not taking any risk, you're guaranteeing that you're going to live an unsatisfactory life from your perspective. You're not going to achieve your objectives. So let's now contra that with potentially investing into a balanced fund, a well-managed balanced fund. In any one year, you don't know whether it's going to go up or whether it's going to go down. So there's no predictability, there's no certainty in 1 year. Over any 10 years, though, you've got an extremely predictable outcome where you've actually never, over the past 30, 40 years, over any 10-year rolling period, underinformed inflation plus an amount by being in one of those type portfolios. So by taking on little risk over the short term, what you end up doing is creating a more certain outcome over the long run. So perhaps rather than viewing risk as the risk of losing money in any 1 year, look at how predictable that outcome is over a longer period. And I guess to summarize, we could probably think of it as, by planning for the short term is probably the greatest risk that a person can take. By planning for the long term, you mitigate the risk significantly. So I hope that answers the question for you.
I'm sure it does, and I know that you and I are going to be talking lots more about this. Thank you very much, Alex. Yes, I don't want to leave you out. So, my friend, please, what piece of advice would you give to the generations that are driven by the get-quick-rich mentality?
3 specific pieces of advice I'd give them. I mean, one
the tips and tricks to get rich quick just don't work, as I outlined in my presentation. The principles that my father tried to bestow on me, that building wealth is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So time and patience plus financial literacy, putting a little bit away on a regular basis. So start as early as you can to invest for the long term. Secondly, make use of the available free tools there are. In our case, what we've put on show today, GCI Educate, so get yourself a financial literacy. Everyone deserves the opportunity to learn about money and managing finances. And then combine that with a tool like WealthBit that allows you to take a financial education and put sound financial planning into practice. And then lastly, I don't take the days gone by where you could just remove the cap from the oil sump at the bottom, drain the oil and service your car. With all the electronics these days, I take my car to be serviced by the experts. That's why there are experts around. So the final thing I would say is partner with a trusted financial advisory. So someone who's going to give you expert advice to help you refine that plan as circumstances changes, because things happen and life always changes, to allow you to stay on track to secure financial freedom.
Thanks, Jos. That's great. Moving on, there's a question, Graeme, for you in terms of the presentation. It said, how do you suggest we work towards careers that adopt the Ikigai approach but still focus on the building wealth at the same time?
I think that the concept of that model, isn't it great? Let me just put it up again so that we can see it again. So it's a fantastic model, isn't it? And maybe now you've got a moment to just look at the detail that I've put into that graphic. That doesn't just flash you by while you're looking at it during the presentation. That I think the question, Paula, that's been asked is somebody saying, well, should you choose a career where you're good at it and you love it, but don't worry about the money? Then you're doing a passion. That's when somebody says, I want to be a musician for the rest of my life, which would have been my preference. I still play. I played the trumpet from 9 years old, still play it. I managed to do it professionally while I was a student, got paid for some gigs, and I would have loved to have done it my whole life. But at some stage, you've got to sit down and you've got to say, but how much am I being paid for it? And is that enough? So, is it enough is different answer for every single person. And if you're lucky enough to have parents who can subsidize you, then you need to make less. If you're coming from a poorer family like I did, well, then you've got to make more. So that every person must make their own decision. And then, of course, as I said in the presentation, what today's young people also want to do is make sure that they're doing something that actually makes a difference in the world, which I'm loving, watching the young people coming through with that mindset. So for me, I think the model explains itself. We've just got to make sure we get the balance between all four of these. And if any one of these gets out of balance, your life will feel out of balance. That's why a lot of this conversation, and I know it's something you guys take seriously at GCI, it's not just a financial conversation, is it? It's not just how much money do you need, and that's the only question we're asking you. It's what are your goals? What are your values? What are you trying to achieve? Who are you? That's why financial planning is so much more than just how much money do you need and how much money have you got. Now, I agree with what Jos has just said. That's why getting proper professional help is valuable, because it must take all of these factors into account and not let one dominate over the others. Then I don't know. Each person must make their own decision about how this balances itself out, but the goal is to find the balance.
Thank you, Graeme. I mean, that was wonderful. Leading on to my next question, you started off with passion. I suppose the next one is for Sarah regarding motivation. And the question to you, Sarah, is how can someone stay motivated? It's often so easy for us to give up and not to actually plow through and to the end line or the finishing line. What are some of the strategies you could offer someone to stay motivated and achieve their goals?
Yeah, I think it starts with having clear goals, the ability to break them down into small little chunks, You don't just get up and say, I'm going to go to Everest. You know, you start with Kili and you train for this, you know. I think, and also most importantly, you need to be able to celebrate the small wins, you know, and not just be anxious about the big goals because you'll be demotivated in that way. The other thing is choose your attitude, you know, and hopefully that's a positive one. Be very deliberate because it's easy. Not every day is the same, but you can choose to be positive in everything and be deliberate about learning from every experience. I think that would keep one motivated. It certainly has worked for me. And the celebration ranges from just having a cup of fizzy drinks, which I don't, but on that day I'll do that because I'm celebrating. And if I look at what Graeme is talking about, which is very much important in terms of wealth and intergenerational wealth, save up $100. If that's what you can that month, you've done something. It's a small step helps you to get to the top of your world every time.
That's wonderful, Sarah. I know we're going a little bit over time and we've got so many questions. So please stay on. We won't go longer than 12:30, probably finish shortly. But Sarah, there's another question that that's just popped up and I'm going to be asking you. What's the next goal for you?
Oh, wow. Thank you for that. I'm actually doing what is called the Explorer Grand Slam. So climbing the 7 highest peaks on the 7 continents around the world, going to the North Pole and the South Pole. Just before COVID hit, I did the South Pole and became the first Black African woman to do the South Pole. And there are only 70 people in the world that have done so. I definitely am one who believes in big, scary goals. But I go at them one step at a time. So yeah, that's the next big thing. And in December, January, I'm doing Mount Vincent, which is on Antarctica.
Sarah, thanks. That sounds fantastic. Sounds quite scary. At GCI, we've also got our scary goals, and we call them our BHAG, which is the big, hairy, audacious goals that's out there. So from our side, we're wishing you lots of luck there. That's not a small goal that you've got there. That's quite an exciting one. Graeme, talking about goals and just listening to your presentation, the one question that came up is what, if you could give one key piece of advice to the millennials of today, what would you say that would be?
I'm actually going to combine that with another question that I saw coming in. Somebody asking about, is it worth taking the risk in changing careers? And the reason I'm bringing that in is because that's my advice to young people. I have 3 millennials in my house, 3 daughters, 2 at varsity and 1 younger. And my advice to them is don't settle in too quickly. And don't think that the decision you've made is a once and for all decision once you've made it. And that might sound a little bit scary as advice because you know our grandparents told us get a good job in a big company and stay there, and that's kind of in the back of your head, play it safe. But there are a number of people who know what they want to do, and they've known what they wanted to do forever, and they focused on it, and they can get their ikigai, and fine, go for it. But I think for everybody else, we live in a world where there's things changing so quickly. Where the context is shifting so quickly that you'll do your best work if you're able to adapt and adjust as you go. That's true for business strategies and for how you think about building a business, but it's also true for your life. The statistics show that the average 30-year-old today who has a degree, so it's a smallish group, but think about professionals who are in their early 30s. More than half of them are no longer using their professional qualification. So by the age of 30, they have already shifted to a different career. I wonder if you think through the people who work with you and for you at GCI, whether that's true. It probably is. And so we shouldn't then be saying to people, you've got to pick your lane, choose your subjects at age 15, get your university degree by age 20, pick your career, now you're stuck. Sarah's story. is a story of, well, you kind of know where you want to go, but maybe you've got to go a different route, right? And I think that's great advice. It was a lovely partnership with you today, Sarah, with the messages we gave, because I think it's the same message that we're giving, which is be adaptable, be flexible.
Thank you, Graeme. I'm going to ask one more question, and I'm going to put Alex on the spot, just leading from your response now. Alex, how does the wealth gap impact on the economy?
Sorry, on mute there. Quite significantly, Paula. We're already seeing it playing out. And I guess the best way to describe this is just think of this scenario. Think of a scenario where a person, perhaps a millennial, is earning a good income. Let's just say the income is 50,000. And they go through life and they go to a point in time where they can no longer earn an income. And at that point where they can no longer earn the same amount of income, they start living off their investments. But because they haven't saved enough, because they haven't built up enough wealth, they have to drop their living standard from 50 down to, let's say, 30. Now on 30, they'll still eat, they'll still get by, they'll still be okay. However, their spending in the economy has now dropped from 50 down to 30. That gap of 20 represents a whole lot of destruction of jobs. And that's what we're seeing play out in the economy at the moment. We're seeing job destruction happening. We're seeing social welfare sort of spiral out of control. Where in 2002, we had around 2 million people on some form of social protection. 2017, that had climbed up to about 17 million people. It's probably close to about 19 million. I think I saw a figure of 18.5 million the other day. So that it's certainly having an effect, and we're almost seeing socialism being perpetuated throughout the world, where the socially dependent population is increasing. So I think that results in a problem, a very, very big problem. Less people supporting more people.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for sharing that. And it's definitely something for all of us to consider. And so for me, not to put any gloom on this, I know there's many, many questions in the chat boxes and the Q&A. The panelists will answer you. But something that I'm so eager to understand, I mean, Sarah, the people are asking, are you writing a book? Is there a book out? But for me is to know, Sarah, what do you know now that you wish you knew in your early 20s?
Wow. Not to worry about what people think of me and dictating my own success. Whether I succeed or I fail, I need to make that decision, because I find that people's expectations are so varied and I can't meet them all the time, and I feel I'm letting down everybody and myself. But if I focus on what my success is, and my success really was getting to the top of the world at some point, and when I didn't, I focused on the learnings as successes, because I went back in 2015, a better person, a better climber, a lot more knowledgeable and stronger. And that was success, and I celebrated that. And that kept me motivated. And as a young girl, I didn't know that. And what people thought of me, their standards, put me down for longer than it should and wasted a lot of my time.
That's beautifully. Thank you for sharing. So Graeme, I mean, listening to Sarah and the way she's just shared and gone back to what she could or she couldn't change, is as a parent, how would you suggest we raise our kids when it comes to a mindset and controlling our money?
I think that there are probably three things we should be doing as parents, whatever else we do. I think the first is we should be helping our children to discover their balance, their ikigai, or to become better people than we were. I think parenting has changed a lot in the last 20 or 30 years, from trying to kind of create clones of ourselves or try to guide our children in very narrow paths to helping our children become their best. I think the second thing is you want to help your children to have an opportunity mindset. So the decisions they make, even if you can't see long-term, you must open doors for yourself, create opportunities for yourself, and see what the world gives you. And then linking to what Sarah's just said, I think as parents, we must show our children that at least we believe in them. That no matter what other people think of them or what the world might say of them, we believe in them. Sometimes as a parent, you've got to kind of pretend that sometimes, because sometimes you look at your kids and go, oh my word, what have you just done? But I think if they find a place in our homes where they can try to be who they are, even if they mess up, and realize that it's safe to do that, we'll let them out into the world in good shape.
Thank you, Graeme. Thanks for sharing. I'm so nervous because there's so many questions coming through from all of you. And I want to say thank you for the audience engaging with us. Graeme, we're running out of time, but how about another question? The question is, how does one influence behavior of different individuals from the generations that are actually so different from each other?
There are two answers to that very quickly, because I know I need to end by past as well. So I'll give you two quick answers. The first one is we're not quite as different as we think we are. The book I wrote about generations, I called Mind the Gap. And I got the inspiration for the title from the first time I visited London, and I stood on a train station. And you get the trains coming in, you get this announcement, mind the gap between the train and the platform. Now, being a good South African, I thought there was going to be this massive hole that I would have to like take a run up and jump into the train. Because in South Africa, if you warn something, if we get a warning, it's worth the warning. You know, you arrive, the train arrives, and there's a gap like about this size. Maybe if I was wearing stilettos, I might have just got the heels stuck in it if I wasn't concentrating. And that was my inspiration. There is a gap between the generations, but it's not quite as big as it sometimes feels. Now, so that's kind of a preface, but the answer to the question is focus on values. Focus on the values that connect. So I believe we all believe in integrity and respect and trust and honesty and kindness and etc. There's a long list of things we all agree on. And then look for the fact that other people might be displaying those values differently, but you still share the values. If you start with that mindset, it'll take you far in working between different generations. And by the way, between different cultures as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Guys, that brings us to the end of today's masterclass. I want to say thank you so much for the audience engaging with us. Please, we're not going to close the webinar now. We will continue answering your questions. But from our side, I want to say thank you for all the wonderful, fabulous speakers. I can't wait to actually see you all at our next masterclass. So I'm actually quite excited and hoping that there's going to be one sooner than later. I also wanted to say thank you. A lot of you have asked, and how can you get the hold of this recording for your family and your friends? Please visit our website for the link. It's going to be there, as well as, subscribe to follow us on our YouTube channel. And just see, it's going to be called the GCI Wealth Tour. And once again, I want to say thank you to all of you sitting in and listening to our masterclass. I think it's been a wonderful day. And be safe and stay safe and have a wonderful day next. Cheers, everybody.